Hello, everybody, and welcome to History/Law Bite number 199, dated February the 28th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History/Law Bite is entitled Gibbons versus Ogden, 22 U.S. 1, 1824. Gibbons versus Ogden was a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision handed down during the Marshall Court era. The decision put an end, for all intents and purposes, to the open legal question of the time as to just how much power individual U.S. states had to regulate interstate commerce, especially when there was an active federal law in place governing that particular issue. In Gibbons versus Ogden, we see Robert Livingston and Robert Fulton given a 20-year monopoly over navigation rights in New York's waters. Now, this was obviously not met with a great deal of approval from many, and lawsuits followed. So in order to put down the hounds, as it were, the two gentlemen franchised their operations and bought out many of their competitors. All right. One such individual who they franchised to was Aaron Ogden, okay, who is the respondent in this case. Ogden would form a partnership with Thomas Gibbons, who, like Ogden himself, operated steamboats, okay? And the difference, however, was that Gibbons was licensed under the Federal Coasting Act of 1793, all right? Whereas Ogden was not. Ogden was essentially under the purview of New York. So, with that in mind, the two worked together for about 3 years until their partnership collapsed when Mr. Gibbons began operating a steamboat on a tract of water that ran from New York into New Jersey. Now, keep in mind, this tract of water had already been licensed under the Federal Coasting Act of 1793, so it was perfectly permissible for him to operate his steamboats on those waters. The waters are going between New York and New Jersey, all right? However, Mr. Ogden felt differently because he had been granted privileges to operate on these waters. He felt that Gibbons was interfering with his exclusive monopoly to navigate that particular tract of water. So he filed suit in the New York courts to stop Mr. Gibbons from operating his steamboats along that tract of water. All right. Now, both of these guys got lawyered up very well, and the arguments presented were very good. All right. The attorneys for Ogden argued that not only does the federal government have the power to regulate interstate commerce in these waters going from one state to another, but the states have concurrent power to do it as well. All right. The attorneys for Gibbons, okay, which included the legendary Daniel Webster. I know you've heard that name before. Gibbons' attorney argued that the federal government had exclusive power to regulate interstate commerce, found via Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which I'll read for you right now. It reads, "To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes." All right? So these are the arguments presented. Again, Ogden's team is arguing that states have just as much right to regulate interstate commerce as the federal government does. Gibbons' team is arguing that the federal government has the exclusive power to regulate interstate commerce. All right? And the New York courts ruled against Mr. Gibbons issuing an injunction against him operating his steamboats on those waters. And on appeal, the highest court in New York with respect to handling this type of matter affirmed the lower court decision. Thus, those courts were respectively the New York Court of Chancery and the New York Court of Errors. Okay, interesting names indeed. So, with his defeat in the New York courts, Mr. Gibbons appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States, presenting the same arguments as he had done in the New York courts, that the monopoly given by the state of New York to Ogden conflicted with an existing federal law, and that Congress had the power, the superior power at the very least, to regulate interstate commerce, and that New York's law interfering with that, thus granting certain people monopolies, was unconstitutional because it violated and went against an existing federal law. Ogden's attorneys also argued their previous statement from the lower courts that states had concurrent power to regulate interstate commerce. All right? So with that, the issue presented to the Supreme Court was quite simple. Does Congress possess the supreme, or at least the superior power, to regulate interstate commerce? All right? Or does Congress possess exclusive power to regulate interstate commerce? More tightly framed, the question would be as follows. Does the Constitution give Congress supreme authority over interstate commerce? And in a unanimous decision authored by none other than Chief Justice John Marshall, the Supreme Court ruled that it did. The unanimous decision written by Marshall held New York's law to be unconstitutional. They ruled that Congress had the power to regulate interstate commerce via Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution. The Supreme Court interpreted the Commerce Clause very broadly here. Commerce, in the eyes of the court, included more than just mere traffic, all right, but trade in commodities, which includes navigation. Therefore, with that in mind, interstate navigation fell under the definition of interstate commerce. Okay? Thus, New York's law granting monopolies here interfered with an existing federal law. Okay? The Federal Coasting Act of 1793, to be specific. And thus, New York's law was unconstitutional. The court emphasized, that a federal law here would obviously take precedence over a state law to the contrary. That, of course, would come by way of the Supremacy Clause, as Congress is given plenary authority to regulate commerce from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution. And since this is an area where the federal government is given clearly enumerated power to regulate, any state laws to the contrary would be unconstitutional per the simple language of the Supremacy Clause. Though I will add that that clause was not referenced in the decision. Okay? So, that was the decision in Gibbons versus Ogden. And I'll add that Justice Thomas Johnson wrote a strong concurrence to Marshall's majority opinion, holding that not only did the federal government have the power, in this case clearly to regulate interstate commerce, but it had the exclusive power to regulate it. And any state laws that attempted to do so were automatically unconstitutional. All right? So that's that. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Gibbons versus Ogden. All right? 22 U.S. 1, 1824. If you have any questions or controversies, leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so now if you would be so kind. Just hit that little red subscribe button and we'll be in business. If you wish to donate to my channel, links are provided on the main page. Thank you so much again for listening and for all your support. You have no idea how much it's appreciated. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.